So I have 3 photographs that we're going to be working from today. Last week we were working on what I call point of view, which is how we look at something and we see what angle it is. And these flowers are going to be sort of reinforcing that idea, so that we have one set of flowers where we're looking pretty much straight down onto them with a little bit of curve or lean back on one of them. One of them is pretty much straight on, and so that's one set of pictures. We have another one where we're looking almost side view to this. So now we see the center round on here and the petals coming out either way. We're seeing the stem on it. And then the third one is sort of halfway in between. So we have a 3/4 view on both of these, and then we've got a bud where we can sort of see the side of it. And we've got some plant matter down below if we want to get involved with that. So what I wanted to sort of talk about today was ways of approaching this. So remember when we were doing the point of view with the cups and we were drawing the shape at the top of the cup with an oval? Well, what I like to do with these is, rather than coming in detail to start with, I want to sort of see about how big this is and what kind of a shape that is. And then same with the little center in here, how that is. And then we can come back and find petals inside of that. So we have another one here that is a little more roundish, but it's still not totally round. It's a little bit of an oval and a fairly big center in there. And then our last one here, the bud, is not quite round, but almost. And then the top of it comes up and you can see into there. So then that changes and comes around. So we're doing a little bit of what we would call the gesture drawing with this, where we're coming in and finding the shape of the pieces. And then inside of this, then we can start finding some of these petals. And if we don't get the exact same number of petals, no one is going to know the difference. And maybe it comes a little bit outside of that circle we drew, and then there's a break in here. And another petal that sits down. You notice that I'm doing this pretty loosely, and I'm keeping the pencil holding it from the back end so I don't come in here and get too tight with it. And those are a little bit shorter in there, and there's a petal back in here. And then maybe some of these petals on this side actually overlap into that centerpiece a little bit. Okay, so now this, oh gosh, I have to get this a whole lot bigger in the center here. That really comes out quite a ways. And then we get our petals coming out into here. A few of them turn. So we're just looking at shapes. You know, we all sort of know what a flower looks like, and if we were thinking of, you know, what our preconceived notion of a daisy is. Here, let me just draw a preconceived notion of a daisy. Preconceived notion of a daisy is this, with a center in it. There we are, preconceived notion of a daisy. But notice how, as we look at this, it's not really quite that preconceived notion. It has a little more, and that comes up a little bit more there. These petals are a little shorter on this side. Some of these are a little longer. Some of them turn up a little bit. Some of them separate just a little, so that our preconceived notion of those flowers isn't really what we see here as we start looking in the, you know, at the reality of this. And then like the stem coming down here, what happens with those petals? Do they come off right across from each other? Do they stagger a little bit? Are they straight leaves? Do they turn? Are they fat? And that comes in. Or do they wrap across the stem a little ways? Are they coming from back behind the stem? And that's maybe a little skinnier one, and it comes from behind there. And then this next leaf sort of wraps back around. We have another one coming from back behind that's a little bigger. We have another one that crosses over the front of this. And I can probably ignore a lot of the rest of these leaves if I want to. And then we have another there's actually a little stem in here. Okay. So that's a lot of what, and then this is too big in here. You start actually seeing it when you get a little bit closer into here, and then you can see a little bit of these outside calyx on this, and we have one petal that's starting to open up in there, and then we have a stem that comes off here. I could do a lot more detail work on this, but I'm going to leave this at this point because what I'm going to want to have you guys do is, and we'll just take this guy off of here. I'm going to have you guys do the same sort of thing and have you look at the details later, but just do a quick contour drawing, do a shape of what the shape of the flower is, what kind of shape is it, and what kind of shape is that center, and then do the petals in there, but still have them relatively rough. We won't finish it yet. We can come back and do more work on this later. We can come back in and we can erase away that circle that we put in. I can erase some of the interior lines that I got in there and then really work on getting this more detailed. And I'm also seeing that maybe I got that a little too, now that I'm looking at it a little more, that maybe I got that a little bit too deep there. And these petals don't come out very far, so maybe I got those a little too far out. And then as it comes off this way, they're a little longer. See those corrections as we go. Okay, so you're going to be doing that. I'll do another quickie one for you. And I'm not going to do the finish on any of these because you're going to be working on the finishes. So this one here, which is the side view, notice how this is a mound here, and then all the petals come off of that. So our big shape of this is a big elongated oval. And then we have this center that runs through here that's really pretty big. And there's some petals that are very foreshortened that don't stick out any more than that center does. With other petals that come down, we have petals that are coming out like this. And some of them are just almost a skinny line because we're really seeing these from the side, and that has to come in right next to that. Okay, so we have petals that we call foreshortened. So these petals right here are foreshortened. You're looking right into them, and so you only see a little bit of it because of the way that you're looking at it. Where on the side, we might be looking at it perfectly on the side. And so that goes back up that way. And so you have to stop yourself from thinking about that preconceived notion of what a flower looks like, and just really look at those shapes and how those shapes are formed as we start making this. And I can come back and do corrections in this and clean it up some. I'm just wanting to get the feeling of those shapes down right now. So that's going to go like that. I'm not really lifting my pencil off the page very much, but I'm not just doing steady lines. It's more like the gesture drawing where I'm going back and forth with it just a little bit. Maybe this guy comes out a little bit further, that comes out there a little further. And then this is all going to be darker than those petals by quite a bit. And let's see, where does that stem come from? It actually angles here and then runs down this way. And it isn't until we get down in here that there's any leaves coming off of it. And and they wrap right across that, and then the next one comes off of that stem, and they're a little fatter at the center, a little skinnier out toward the ends, but they stay relatively fat down at the bottom. And there's one more leaf that runs back through here, and then a leaf right down in there. Okay, roughed out. So let me rough out the third one for you. Now, this last one, we're going to be thinking a little bit about what I call negative spaces. So we're going to start by defining where these guys are, but then as we start getting the petals between each of them. So we've got this, it's going to be basically a square. Let's get this more the shape of what this is. Our biggest one is here, and he's almost round. And then our next one is up here, and they overlap just a hair. This one, and let's see that center, where's that center in here? Yeah, it's a little bit toward the front. There's a little more longer pieces there than there is on this side of it. This one is pretty much in the center. And then we have one more down here. Overlaps just a little bit. And there's his center, not quite as big as the center on that one. So that one, the center could get bigger. This one, you know, as the flowers age, the centers actually get a little bigger. And then there's petals that come off of this. Okay, so now, this whole idea of negative spaces, as these petals come across, what kind of space is between here and the petal next to it? How does that petal drop across through there? And so as we look at those spaces around what we're doing, we can, it helps us identify what the reality of this is. And then, you know, there's a little bit more of a break in here. Things are a little closer together over there. And then as this comes out here, there's a little more of a space. And you know, when you actually look at these, they have a little fat, slightly stubby end on those petals too. They don't come to a real tight little point. And then there's darker back in here, there's darker in here. Okay, I'm actually going to stop at this point on this so that you guys can work on it, and then I'll come back and I'll do a little bit more complete. So I'm going to stop here. As we develop this, I was starting to talk about negative spaces, but I needed to have a little bit more of this drawn in before I could really show you what I was talking about. So seeing sort of how the petals all work with each other, this is a pretty complex piece, but if we think about the spaces around the petals, it's going to help us sort of identify them as much as anything else. And so if I think about what these spaces are outside of the, let's find one, yeah, let's find the spot right in here. There's a triangle that comes through here and then finds the end of another petal inside there, squares off a little bit, and then comes back in and goes relatively deep into here. And then this petal, there's a space right up in here where this other petal comes out. So I have some things roughed in, but I can ignore them a little bit if I find that they're maybe not working the way I want them to. So there's a little space here, and then we can come out. Let's let that go a little bit more. little space there, and then we're going to come around that petal, find that space out there. And then as I fill this in, let's see, where was this? This was this petal here, and then we're going to come down and be fairly steep here. Now I could also come in here before I do too much more of that and get rid of some of my extraneous lines that I don't really need, i.e. that circle that I drew, which was telling me how big these petals were going to go out to, sort of put them into the placement of the space that they're in. Clean this up just a little bit there, and then let's do the same thing on this flower. Let's take some of that off. So I've got those petals sort of roughed in, but they may not be exactly where I want them. And as I start doing this negative space, the dark background behind it, it helps me see what's going on in reality. So then there's another petal there. And, okay, that goes up, finds the edge of a petal, and then deep in, come back down, and then it's going to find its way in around this petal here until it makes its way down to where one of these petals is coming off of here. Then there's a petal that's very sideways that we see just a little bit of, and I might have lost somebody in there, but that's okay. I'm going to take this down just a little further there. And then I'm seeing a little negative space in here. Little petal goes down, there's a little negative space there. And then everything else is just the shape of these petals. So even as we're doing negative space, we can do a fairly pale. So I just shifted to my number 6 so that I could do a little paler mark here. And this petal is staying pretty much white. And now as we come in here, there's a little triangle right in there. There's a little triangle back in here that finds the tops of some of those petals. There's a little triangle right in here. Everything else is relatively light. And then this is going to go a bit darker here. And there's a little tiny bit right at the bottom of those petals. So is that starting to get us something that's looking interesting? Let's go back up to here. And then way down in on that petal there. And then all of this up in here is dark. Might not be exactly right, but we're getting there. And then there's a big long piece that comes in dark all the way into that center, and then there's a petal that's almost side on that's really quite skinny here. Break, little petal that comes down. This petal stays pretty light. This one is in shadow just a little bit. And where else are we in shadow? Let's see. That one is the one that sits out in front. And its buddy back behind him here is in shadow just a wee touch. But it goes on down into there. Overlaps. Okay. And all of this center is darker than any of that white flower. And then it's a little darker on this side here. It's a little darker there. And then we have a little shadow coming down on some of these petals just a little bit. So there, I've done some of this. You guys can then work your way around, find out how that dark background helps define the shape of those petals. Okay.